Hey everybody, welcome to today's Wednesday workshop here inside of LinkedIn. I'm so excited to be here today talking about whether or not you are rescuing or leading your employees. That is today's topic, about trying to understand that distinction of when we're moving into rescuing versus actually staying in that place of leading. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dranitsaris-Hilliard. I'm one of the co-founders at Caliber Leadership Systems. I'm also the co-author of So You Think You Can Lead. And we're here talking always in these sessions about different strategies of looking at leadership, different ways of looking at leadership, and working through some of the typical leadership dysfunctions that we encounter in our work inside of organizations, where we're helping these businesses to transition, to grow, to have an effective leadership team, and really be able to navigate some of the challenges that emerge when we are working in an organizational dynamic and when we're trying to lead ourselves, right? And, leaders today spend a lot of time trying to figure out why it is that they just can't get that level of engagement or that level of performance that they require, despite what they feel are absolutely their best efforts. Their energy and their time often go into trying to fix their employees, right? Or compensate for unsatisfactory performance, or even rescue their employees when their employees are expressing some level of emotional distress. And many of our clients are spending money and other resources trying to deal with employee disengagement and performance issues without any success. And so this leaves them wondering and asking the question, what is it that's wrong with employees, right? Interestingly, they don't look at what is going on with themselves and how it is that they might actually be contributing to the issue. And in particular, how it is that they might be contributing to that issue through dysfunctional or self-protective leadership behaviors, such as doing the employee's work when they fail to meet expectations, or not holding them accountable, and reteaching tasks that have already been taught. Spending hours discussing employees' frustrations or unhappiness, and also, really their own failure to delegate. They're not even looking at that for fear of overwhelming their employees, right? Deciding to compensate for poor performance or performance gaps instead of managing it is actually an act of disempowerment. And it's a choice ultimately to abdicate our authority. And so again, when employees are not behaving the way leaders expect them to, leaders get triggered into self-protective, emotionally driven behaviors. And of course, these are all tied into the fight-flight mechanism of our brain, that good old survival instinct that kicks in. And that fight response causes us to move into getting angry or frustrated or act out by overpowering that employee. But in the flight response, they actually give their power away, right? And they give their power away to their employees and really silently seething, putting on that mask that most leaders wear when they don't know how to effectively manage performance, manage insubordination, or deal with insubordination, or give corrective feedback. And again, this is where we see these leaders stepping in to rescue their employees, as opposed to really being able to stay with it and what it is that the employee actually needs. So really, this is, understanding the fact that we can go into rescuer mode and starting to be aware of that is a really important step in this process. I was actually just on a call with a client, and we were talking about this notion of rescuing, and in their particular situation, they had internal folks that were needed to deliver on something, and they were always late. And they were always late, meaning that this individual and her team were having to put in extra hours and work longer days in order to still get it done on time. And I said, here's a great example of rescuing versus leading, and not stepping back into that space of saying, how do I lead so that we're not constantly back in here? So again, understanding when we're looking at rescuing, it's important to understand that, again, this is about shifting into self-protective behaviors when we're being triggered to do so. It is about our own disempowerment, our self-disempowerment, when we decide that we can't assert our leadership authority, and that's why we move into rescuer. And to a degree, that fear of exercising our authority is what triggers what we call the drama triangle, and it causes leaders to move into rescuing instead of managing employees. And that's the bottom line, right? When we're leading, we are managing our employees, we're managing their performance. When we've gone into the drama triangle as a result of our self-protective behavior, we've actually moved into rescuing them. So why does this matter? Why do we want to concern ourselves as to whether we're rescuing our employees or leading them? Well, the challenge with rescuing is it leads to getting stuck blaming our employees, right? And so our employees have all the power. And when we're into blaming our employees, we definitely are no longer managing or leading them, right? It pulls us right out of that action we need to be taking to lead. The other thing that's really, really important, if you happen to experience employee entitlement in your organization, rescuing actually leads to increased employee entitlement. So just as we think we're helping or being so helpful as leaders by coming in and rescuing them, the employee's level of entitlement actually increases and grows, because why should I be held accountable? Why should I have to do that? Why should I take that on when I know my boss is going to come in and rescue me from it, right? We often refer to employees, in that notion of delegating up, right? And so if you're leading out of your rescuer, then you're going to take on that upward delegation that they're doing instead of saying, hey, wait a minute, no, let's manage this. It's the expectations on you. This is your performance. This is your task to complete. I'm not going to complete it for you. And leaders must, and this is again why it's so important, leaders must start to really recognize that difference between rescuing and leading their people. Because if we're going to be ultimately effective, if we're going to stay out of that self-protective pattern, we have to recognize when we're moving into rescue them versus when we're staying in with the leading. So some of the things I want you to take away from this session today as I'm talking about it is this introduction to the drama triangle. It's an important consideration. We use it a lot in our leadership training, but also understanding more about the dysfunction that's caused by rescuing employees. Because I think over the last few years in particular, it's like there's some notion that leaders have that is their job, right? And that their people are just so precious that they need to be rescued and they can't be expected to perform, and we can't give them expectations. And so we're constantly in this state of rescuing. And knowing that, again, this is about us as leaders being self-protective as opposed to stepping out of our comfort zone to lead. And the other thing is I want you to take away a bit of an understanding of the impact of this rescuing behavior and what it actually has on your own success as a leader or the success of other leaders around you. Because enabling our employees, fostering that entitlement within them, doesn't actually serve the long-term best interests of the organization, and certainly gets in the way of our ability to be ultimately effective as leaders. So a couple of things that I want to talk about, and I want to highlight sort of three different scenarios. Those leaders who rescue employees essentially allow their employees to victimize them. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about leaders who rescue their employees also allow for self-devaluation and self-disempowerment. So this is really important, what we're doing to ourselves in that act of rescuing, where we think, again, we're being so noble and so helpful, but actually really costs us a fair bit. And leaders who rescue actually can begin to fail at their own job. And this is a really, really important risk to understand. So let's talk about employees as the victim, leader as the rescuer. This is the dynamic we're setting up in the drama triangle, right? When we shift, when employees shift in particular into that victim role where, I can't do this and this is too hard and all of those aspects that come out, leaders then tend to go into the rescuer of this drama triangle, right? Rather than managing their performance. And so we see this happen over and over again. Think of the employee who says, oh, I'm just feeling so overwhelmed. There's no way I can possibly get to all of this. This deadline's so unrealistic. This is just too hard. And then the leader immediately steps in and starts looking at, okay, well, let me see what I can take off of your plate to make it easier for you, right? So this is what we're talking about, the rescuing. So the employee's in the role of the victim is, you've given me so much. You're just expecting too much of me. How could you possibly, set me up in this particular way? And the leader feels compelled, again, because they're being self-protective, to jump in and rescue that particular employee. So the focus then becomes in that situation more on validating the employee and that experience that they're having, or that notion that they're overwhelmed, and supporting, being oh so supportive to that employee versus actually holding them accountable. And because if we immediately step in to kind of rescue them from that work and from that assignment without any conversation or discussion about how did we end up in this place, and let's look at this more objectively, again, we're not understanding the fact that our employees can actually behave and act from the victim persona. We don't expect them, because especially if we don't act from the victim persona as leaders, we certainly don't expect our employees that. And so when they say they're overwhelmed, we take it at face value and we don't ask questions and we don't hold them accountable. And so it's really important when I think about an employee who's acting, or even a leader, we do see leaders who behave this way out of their victim persona as well, it's for us not to get pulled into that rescuer, right? We need to expect it, and then we need to depersonalize their behavior, okay? So some of the things that you can watch for to know that your employee is coming from their victim is, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. You didn't tell me. Ever hear that one? Or I told you I was having issues with, childcare, whatever it was. I don't know why you thought I would be at work on time. So again, they talk as though we have victimized them as leaders simply by asking them to show up on time or to do something in a particular way. You never gave me feedback that I wasn't doing a great job. Now you're telling me I need to improve. So they see how they're making it about us. That triggers our self-protective reaction. And then we go into rescuing and trying to make them feel okay. All right. The victim attacks, right? When people are coming out of their victim, the victim attacks and then accuses the leader. And in the process of doing that, essentially the employee is absolving themselves of any responsibility. So if we shift into rescuer as leaders, we're going along with that story, that the employee had no role in this, that they had no responsibility, no accountability. And this is where leaders typically end up getting snagged into the drama triangle, right? This is where they typically give away their power to that employee. And instead of focusing on the performance issue that is actually at hand, their own victim gets triggered, and then they start defending themselves, right? So I'm not rigid, or they apologize, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, or they go into empathizing, which is where we see the rescuer. I can see why you're upset, let me see what I can do for you, okay? So just be keeping that in mind, right? Is that notion of how they're talking. Are they talking out of their victim? What's the impact that it's having on you? And how do you prevent yourself from going into the rescuer? Again, we can feel in that moment in the rescuer, we can feel like we have this little bit of power, and that's why we like to go into it, because it makes those uncomfortable feelings of that moment, of that situation, go away. But it's kind of like falling on your sword. You sacrifice or victimize yourself in order to make your employees happy. So this is where you've moved into rescuer versus leading, because the focus is on keeping your employee happy as opposed to performing and effective, right? Now, let's talk about the notion of self-disempowerment, giving our power away when we move into rescuer. So again, when we are interpreting actions and behaviors of people and events through what we feel we're entitled to and that others aren't doing for us, this is when we've moved into our own victim leadership persona, which of course, self-protective approach happens all the time. We see it. In fact, a client I was talking to earlier today, we were actually going through that whole sort of being able to really recognize when someone is in a leadership role is acting out of their victim, so we respond to them differently. But again, many leaders come into their role with this set of fixed beliefs about the way in which employees should behave, that employees should be respectful, that the employees should respect their authority, employees should follow what they were told to do and not be insubordinate. And when leaders hold those beliefs, what happens when an employee is not acting in alignment with those beliefs, it leaves the leader at a little bit of a loss. And so leaders will start to talk as though they're being disrespected. They'll start talking as though they are a victim in the dynamic with their employees. Leaders will talk about how badly their employees treat them, or that they don't deserve it because of everything they do to make their employees happy. And again, in this whole victim story, we're giving away our power, because when we're stuck in that drama and in that story, we're not actually stepping in to lead, right? We're not trying to problem solve the actual issue. We're not looking at the performance gap and the misalignment of behavior and actually addressing what is actually going on. And again, in the victim's story, we're never at fault. That's the whole part of this. So when the employee uses it, they're never at fault. When we use it as leaders, we're not at fault. And again, what most leaders don't look at in this situation when they're falling into this pattern of the victim leadership persona is they don't take that look and say, well, what did I do that set this up? If I didn't define the behavioral expectations up front, if I'm not managing performance, I had quite a few sessions with clients today, and this one client was telling me that, she had tasked one of her direct reports with coming in to train a new employee. And the individual didn't, showed up to do that without a computer, without really a plan. And as the leader was talking about it, you could hear how she was talking from the place of the victim was, I can't believe that she would do that. And I can't believe she would do that to me. And, what do I have to go in and handhold her? And again, all of these things where, that the notion that what the employee had done was, all about that individual. And, you can almost hear the undercurrent. It's like, what was she thinking and why would she do that? And when I talked to her about it, and I trying to shift the focus around it, which was, did you define the expectation? Because telling you want her to go in and train somebody isn't defining an expectation, right? What's the expectation from the behavior? What do you want the trainee to cover off? How do you expect her to show up? And that's not micromanaging, as a lot of people will start to characterize it. That's just providing really clear direction. And when we go into that victim place, again, we're not looking at it through that lens of how did I give my power away? How did I disempower myself? How did I set this situation up? And because we don't look at it through those lenses, we actually can't correct it the next time. We can't go back and have that conversation. So again, we end up disempowering ourselves with the issues with others. And again, it lets us feel safe. It lets us off the hook. It gets us out of the discomfort, but it's not actually leading, right? This is a way of us staying in and rescuing as opposed to leading, because ultimately in this case, they're just letting the employee off the hook for making this mistake and not even coming to them and saying, well, what exactly is it that you want me to do when you say you want me to train, right? So there's a whole dynamic that goes on there, but that rescuing has a step out of it and doesn't have a stepping in to lead. So the third one that I just want to talk about is, again, that why does this matter, right? And we always come back to how this gets in the way of leaders actually being able to lead effectively. And when we're rescuing, when we are allowed to stay in that place of rescuer, when we're using our own victim leadership persona, it has a direct impact on the organization, on the people, on the culture, and ultimately on the bottom line. The challenge with going into rescuer is we're not acting out of a place of power and authority, right? So this is about our own disempowerment. And when we disempower ourselves, we are not leading, for sure. And we can't take responsibility for the performance and behaviors of others. And so performance and behavior of our employees is however those employees want to show up and what they want to do and how they want to do it and how they want to behave. Because again, when we're rescuing, we can't actually go into directing and correcting and holding people accountable for their performance and their behavior, right? Because it's like you're just not going to be able to do that because the notion of rescuing is I have to be supportive and I have to keep them happy and I have to make everything okay. And if I'm going in at everything and trying to solve it from that place, I can't actually do the things I need to do to effectively manage performance. So again, that's giving my power away. And we talk about leaking power because leaders do it all the time. And this is just one of the ways. When we get stuck in the rescuer side of the drama triangle, we ultimately are diminishing our own authority as leaders. As though, again, not only do we not have any power, but we're not entitled to exercise the authority that comes with our role. We're not entitled to give direction. We're not entitled to hold people accountable. We're not entitled to set a plan even, right? Like that that aspect of, to be able to expect, to be able to define and set the direction and ultimately hold people accountable. We don't feel like we're entitled to do that. So we diminish, right? We make ourselves smaller. We elevate. I remember doing this when I first started leading employees and not really understanding this was, trying to make them feel like they were equal to me. And it's like, but they're not, right? And by trying to make them feel like they're equal to me, then I just increase their level of entitlement. And then when they're not performing, I'm stuck having to come in and rescue and pick up all the pieces. Fortunately, I learned from those experiences and from watching my clients with this and being able to come in and talk about it just so that we can recognize. Now, feelings start to become before outcomes when leaders are operating out of the rescuer persona. And we've actually gone into organizations where it's sort of the collective behavior set is where they're always rescuing everybody and and feeling victimized, even at the executive level, as though there's some great power above them that are putting these parameters and constraints upon them. And in those situations, it's all about how people are feeling, and everyone's always reacting. Oh, we can't do that because they're going to get upset, or we can't do that because this group over here is going to be upset, or I want to say this, but I can't do that because my employee's not going to like it, and they're going to accuse me of micromanaging, and therefore I can't set any expectations or hold them accountable. So the notion here with the rescuer is that the focus is on helping everybody else feel good about themselves and at the same time neglecting your own feelings, your own needs, your own responsibilities. And leaders that are stuck in this place, they go through it acting as though everything's okay. And really it's not okay. And they're in this place of enabling others' behavior because they don't stand up for what is right. They don't disagree. They don't correct. These are all really, really important aspects of leading. But again, when you're in rescuer, you can't do that, right? Because you can't move into that place of exercising authority and power. Again, when we go in and rescue somebody, this is the power dynamic piece keeps coming back up as we talk about this, right? When you go in and rescue someone, it actually sets up a really uneven balance of power. And with us, we feel like, I'm on top because, I don't have any issues. You're the problem, right? But the reality is that rescuers give their power away and end up being overworked, chronically tired, and unable to kind of grab the reins and really lead the people. So where do we go with this? What do we do about it? And the first place to start with this is disempowering starts from within. So that's the first place we go. We have to recognize when we are keeping our own self-esteem low by using self-judgment, criticisms, negative self-talk. All of that contributes to that disempowerment and keeps us from carrying out our leadership authority. A client today was saying, we were talking about escalating issues in order to get issues within the organization resolved. And her comment, her self-talk was, well, I don't want to be a tattletale. And having to reframe that, because that's really disempowering. If I feel like I'm not entitled to escalate an issue up in the organization in order to get it resolved, then I'm not going to be able to do anything. And so that other individual who's not doing or not complying or whatever the case may be, they end up with all of the power. In another case, client did the flip of it where someone was making a decision and she did not feel that they were, because this individual didn't want to do something. And instead of trying to rescue him, she simply said, okay, I need to escalate this up to our boss and play it out that way. And so instead of going in to rescue him and try and figure out for him or help him or, do it for him, she simply said, no, we're going to lead up and we're going to resolve it in that particular way. So that's that inner piece that we always have to start with, right? If you realize that and this is the question for you, if you've been rescuing your employees, you have to realize that you're not leading them. And now it's time to do something about it. So that's the other piece of this as a kind of the first steps. Focus on performance, not on feelings. That absolutely is a first step. The second you are stopping yourself from having conversations around performance, be it setting expectations, correcting, giving feedback, holding someone accountable because you are afraid of how they are going to feel and you don't want to upset them or hurt their feelings, you need to shift from that because then you're in rescuer. And again, we want to move you out of rescuer and into leading. It's you need to see that leadership is an impersonal activity, or what we call transactional, right? This is a transaction in order to get the employee to perform the way you want. And it's not a place to get your emotional and ego needs met. And so that means you have to give up that pleasure of rescuing. And you have to give up that short-term pleasure that makes you, again, in that moment can feel more powerful for that long-term satisfaction of achieving your goals. And again, you don't get that immediate payoff that rescuing might give you, but managing performance leads to improved performance, increased productivity, less emotional drama, which we can all sign up for, greater team cohesiveness, right? Rescuing ultimately does a huge disservice to our employees as well. So if you really believe that you're working in your employees' self-interest, rescuing doesn't do that because it limits their potential. They don't get the opportunity to stretch, to grow, to develop, to evolve, and it actually gets in the way of task and ultimately job mastery, which down the road can, where, especially if you, sort of over promote folks because again, you're in that rescuing, they expect a promotion and so you're going to give it to them, that you're not actually looking at them to go through that process of having to struggle through in order to develop. And that's what our growth as humans is all about. And we don't want to take that away from people and limit them because we're so busy trying to save them and trying to make things easy for them, right? But more importantly, is how it stops you as a leader, right? And how it stops you in your own development because you're choosing, one, to do the tasks of your employees, which you should not be doing at your level. But two, it's keeping you within your own comfort zone, which also blocks your ability to develop up your skills. And again, when we're thinking about us as leaders, it's really building up that ability to exercise our power, to exercise our authority effectively, to manage performance, and sometimes it can start with something as simple as expecting your employees to provide a daily progress update instead of you chasing them over and over again to find out where things are at. So we're shifting that relationship around. I'm not here to take care of you. I'm not here to rescue you. Not in this way when we're talking about around performance, but I'm here to lead you. This is my expectation. You need to meet my expectation. Okay. So with that, hope you, stay with us for some more. We've got some more topics coming up around the leadership dysfunctions. We always love to talk about them and share some of our stories and experiences, give you some key tips and takeaways so that you can start working on building your leadership effectiveness. And if you haven't had a chance yet, check out our YouTube channel, Dranitsaris-Hilliard. Tons of great resources around leadership, organizational dysfunction, and personal development. And also our podcast series, Dismantling Dysfunction, where we do a much deeper dive into the different organizational dysfunctions and leave you with some really clear tips and strategies for dealing with these broader leadership and organizational dysfunctions that always get in the way of organizations achieving their potential. Thanks again so much for joining me. Love to hear from you and your comments and your feedback. And until next time, thanks again.